Good morning, guys. How are we doing today? Today I want to talk to you about something near and dear to my heart, and something that you really need to have large volumes of labels, discographies to see. And so that's one thing I try to share with you guys is things that I've seen and learned from having so many of the labels, discographies from this time frame. And I limit a lot of what I talk about to 50 to 65 because that's what I know about. I collected the labels from those years, their discographies, when those labels launched, up until the changing of the guard, as all these labels kind of fall out of favor. New ones come to the fore. By 65, things have changed a lot. A lot of the great jazz labels from this era by 65 are very peripheral or gone. You know, it's Bethlehem's gone, Riverside's gone, Blue Note's on its deathbed. It's going to be bought out shortly. Prestige has completely transitioned itself into a soul jazz station channeled by 65. It's contemporary stays around a long time, of course, ends up consolidating with Fantasy. Pacific, I believe, is doing things, Royal Pacific Records. But again, those are white-backed situations, so there's more money to be had. Argo becomes Cadet. Cadet kind of continues. Emersy's been discontinued. It's just now Mercury. The great Emersy Jazz imprint's gone by 65. So there's a lot of fluctuation happening. By 65, Savoy isn't touching jazz. All that avant-garde, Savoy's not going to even dabble in that. So this is the era that I've really fallen in love with. I love the art. I love the music. I love the sounds. I love the social consciousness. There's an awareness and attention and a volatility in the air that an earlier generation of player, the Fats Navarro, even the Thad Joneses, these guys weren't going to be so openly discontent. It was too dangerous. It was more, let's just try to keep our heads down. You know, let's try to have a good time. Let's try to play the blues and feel better about things, but let's not openly confront our agitator. By the late 50s, that tone has changed, and the new generation of kids coming up, and we're talking the black players, there's a definite militancy, a lack of, we're out of patience. It's time for things to change. Things are starting to happen. There's stirrings. There's things happening in the South with the schools and segregation, and it's just, there's an awareness of the times, and if not now, then when? And it really comes across in the music of hard bop especially. And something I've noticed over the years, and it's become clearer and clearer to me, is the consistency of the Blue Note discography. And in particular, what I want to talk about is 1957. We're doing the years and the highlights of the years, and I want to do this little separate by note here to talk about what Blue Note does in 1957. And it's unprecedented on a lot of levels. No label, as I've told you before, is close to as unanimously black in its releases. It's almost across the board. In the great 400 albums that they do in this time frame, number of records made by white artists, it's under 10. J.R. Montrose, Yudda Hip, there's a few other people who make a few records, but it's almost exclusively the voice of the young black oppressed male speaking out. 55, 56, Blue Note's kind of getting its sea legs. It's transitioning from a label that had some Dixieland stuff, was licensing stuff from Europe like Dizzy Gillespie, the Sidney Bechet stuff. They weren't tracking that stuff, they were just licensing it. You know? And so they were kind of coming into their own in the mid-50s, and 56, the LP era is in full swing, and they start to do some important stuff in 56. But by 57, it's now current. We're releasing stuff recorded in this moment. We're going to put a lot of it out. And I challenge anyone to look at any point in any label's history in the jazz kingdom. And you can go back to earlier time frames if you want. It's hard to document the pre-war 78s in the same way. Ellington arguably does a string of releases in the early 40s that's incredible. But that's kind of one artist we're talking about. Here we're talking about a stable of artists at one label that documents a continuous string of LPs that's a fist in the air. It's almighty, potent, virile, and there's a transition happening. And you can take Prestige's body of work from this time frame, Riverside, Savoy, any of the labels you want. I challenge you to put it up against what Blue Note does in 1957 and ask you, what place do these records hold in the jazz canon? And every other label has hits and misses. Every other label has classics and unknowns. What Blue Note does here in 57, and I'm actually going to include the first 10 or so releases from 58 here, just to show you the streak and the durability of what was happening. But consistently they're releasing this incredible product that if you were to go through the Penguin Jazz Guide or any of those jazz review type magazines or books, almost everything in this streak I'm about to show you would be rated out of 5 stars, 4 stars, 4.5 stars, 3.5 stars, 5 stars. There's no clunkers. There's no completely anonymous. There's no capitulating to the demands of what was hot in the white world, in the theaters, in the movies. It's just a consistent release after release of some of the most potent music mankind's ever documented. And there's even a little mini stretch within this stretch where 4 or 5 records come on in a row that are absolutely all giants, including the Blue Train. Right around Blue Train, there's a streak of 5, 6 records that it's such royal nobility, it's crazy. But let's dig in. We're going to start now at number 1558. Okay? Early 1957. Rollins is in the fold. For me, Rollins never sounds better than when he's working under the Blue Note label with some of the Blue Note sidemen and really is tapping in to the potency and virility of these young black males. Being around that condition affects your condition. And Horace Silver's on this, Chambers, Art Blakey's on this, J.J. Johnson's on this. He's not really a Blue Note guy in the same sense. He has some earlier recordings in the 50s on Blue Note. And of course, Monk is also on this. And Monk's Blue Note recordings come back from 49-50. But that being said, this record is the beginning of an incredible stretch. J.J. Johnson was just doing some pretty incredible stuff there. I was pretty blown away by that. It's a beginning of something. And if you listen to the tempos, listen to the potency, and listen to even the intense aggression of Sonny. Sonny can be a very sunny disposition sometimes. If you listen to one of those contemporary records, he's almost joyful. Here he feels a whole lot more intense. And let's just dive in. So this is 1558. 1559, we have Johnny Griffin. And this record is absolutely, again, let's just play a little bit. And part of what makes this streak what it is they're all working together. So there's a commonality in their emotional makeup, in their dialogues, in their conversations, in their rehearsal time, in their smoke breaks, that they're speaking in unison when they play. And it's a bit like a congregation at a church, and the elders and the minister have spoken so much together that the elders are confirming everything that the preacher has to say. And so whenever the preacher makes a great point, the elders give an amen. Yeah. Amen. Lord Jesus. They're confirming, validating what he's saying. And so the rest of the flock has to look at not one leader, but a unified vision of 4, 5, 6 leaders professing a gospel. And that unity has a power and a strength to it. And us as ignorant white people go, oh, I sure like this record. We don't understand what we're feeling, but we feel it the same. We are touched by it. It's in our gut going, I don't know what, but there's something about these records. And there absolutely is. It's a unified black expression of exhaustion, of frustration, of change. And we're going to dictate that change happens. And this record here, 1559, it's got Mobley, Griffin, Coltrane, Lee Morgan, four of the great leaders of this movement. And Coltrane makes one record here as a leader. But he shows up numerous times as a sideman. And I feel like he's a very potent element to add to this mix. And I think Coltrane takes some of what he grasped here with these cats and takes it on with him to the Miles Davis groups. I think it's a very important part of Coltrane's emotional context, his black identity. Wynton Kelly, Chambers, and Art Blakey, again. And two of the real important threads here is Blakey's foundation as a drummer, as the jazz messenger, becomes one of the most powerful forces in the history of jazz. Blakey has a no-nonsense approach to the guys he teaches and even to the guys he plays with as a sideman. There's no inkling in his demeanor that this is all a game. This is all just for fun. It's dead serious with Art Blakey. And the other guy who I think is going to be a real integral part of this whole thing that we'll see very shortly is Sonny Clark. Sonny Clark is kind of an enlightened cat. He's got a political sensibility to him that I just feel in a lot of what he has to say. And it didn't happen overnight, but I got to the point where I realized that most of the most powerful hard bop records in the Blue Note canon, Sonny Clark's never far away. And I would have to guess if you took the 10 most powerful hard bop Blue Note records, Sonny Clark would be on like 7 or 8 of them. He's just such a nucleus for the agitation, for the resistance. I feel like he was a real leader in the studio, in the rehearsals, in the relaxing times. He was talking. I feel like he was always saying, guys, we got to make things happen. We got to make things change in this country. We can't continue as we are. And I feel like Clark, these records I'm showing you kind of mirror his time at Blue Note. He does make Leapin' and Lopin' in the early 60s, which was kind of a comeback record shortly before he passes. But 57, 58, Clark's body of work is right there. And his side work is pretty impressive as well in that same time frame. And I think he's such a huge part of the Blue Note sound, and it doesn't really get documented. And what is the Blue Note sound? The Blue Note sound has an anger in it, a frustration, an optimism, a willingness to continue the fight if we see a light, if we believe that we can make a difference. And I just think this whole group stable of young men, again, there's no other label like this where the body of work is so dominated by African American youth. Prestige has a lot of white guys, Riverside has a lot of white guys, and most of the labels get 50% white at least. Blue Note's 96% black music and 96% black sidemen. And if you take Pepper Adams out of the equation, who's half a black guy, being raised in Detroit in the ghetto, he's him and Don Bird, like Pepper Adams is a brother. You know what I mean? I got told DJing a lot that I'm pretty much honorary black man. Brother from a different mother, I got told that all the time. In fact, I had a lot of grown men telling me that I was straight N-word. Grown black men coming up to me with their furry Kangol and their cane and their Cadillac out in the yard going, man, white boy, you straight N-word. And they meant it in the most complimentary sense that they could use that word. And I feel like that's kind of the condition here. Pepper Adams was definitely kind of included in that mix. I mean, he comes along a little more in the 4000 series with Donald Byrd. But again, this Hank Mobley record with Donald Byrd, John Jenkins, Bobby Timmons, Wilbur Ware, and Philly Joe Jones, fantastic session. And for me, Bobby Timmons, again, one of the piano players here, his time with Blakey, his emotional makeup, Timmons feels like he's a potent, virile arrow that wants to cut through. This record's a slight exception. This is Sabo Martinez, Paulo Congo, Blue Note 1561. And he is part of the Dizzy Gillespie Cubano Latin thing going on, and they give him a record, and it doesn't really fit with the color and the timbre of everything else that's happening at Blue Note, but I still wanted to show it to show you that the exception proves the rule. This is the one thing in these 30-some records I'm going to show you that is a little bit less militant. 1562. The Stylings of Silver. The great Horace Silver. He is the middle of the road to the potency of the Clarks and the Timmons and the Blakeys. A guy like Horace Silver is a little bit more genteel. But don't mistake yourself. He's part of this movement. His groups, his time with the Messengers before this in 56, 55, his work with Mobley and all these cats. He's a part of this. Yeah, we gotta make change. And he's the more gentle side of it, but there's still an urgency to Horace Silver's records from this time frame. And again, this is firmly in the lexicon of classic, legendary, hard bop recordings in all the jazz. Jimmy Smith at the organ plays Pretty Just For You, 1563. Jimmy Smith is the one other cat, apart from Sabo Martinez, who is a little bit on his own plane. I feel like he works enough with these guys where he certainly embodies some of that. But I also know enough about Jimmy Smith personality-wise to know that Jimmy Smith's strongest motivation was Jimmy Smith. And with Sonny Clark, you don't necessarily get the feeling that this is about Sonny Clark. This is about the black people in general. And I get that a lot from the best black music. It's speaking for my people, not for myself. Jimmy Smith is very much an ego-driven, speaking in the first person or third person. Jimmy Smith don't like that. Jimmy Smith likes this. And he knew how talented he was. And he plays the blues, and he definitely has a sorrow to express, but I wouldn't necessarily include him in the classic Blue Note sound. He's a little bit outside that cusp. Again, because his vision is a little bit more about his star. And again, this is Jimmy McFadden, Eddie McFadden on guitar, Donald Bailey trio, and those guys aren't part of this clique per se. But it's the clique at Blue Note, this posse, that's what makes this music what it is. This is number 1564. And Paul Chambers is at the center of a lot of these sessions. A brilliant player, a giant of a guy in stature. He's behind 200-300 of the most important hard bop modern jazz sessions of the late 50s into the early 60s. I'm a huge Paul Chambers fan. I think he's always a great center for the music. He stays close to the blues. He never lets the band stray too far into places where he doesn't feel it should go. But this record has Donald Byrd, Clifford Jordan, Tommy Flanagan, and Elvin Jones. And so it has a powerful modernity. There's an aggression to the music that's mid-tempo and a veracity to the music that's up-tempo. And that's what you need to hear, is when you listen to mid-tempo Blue Note from this period, there's a full, powerful pulse to it. It's not soft. It's not delicate. It's in your fucking face. It's bang, bang, bang on the fucking door. Let us in. And the more powerful the tempo becomes, the more virile the music becomes. And they can play at blistering tempos, courtesy of the great Clifford Brown. Clifford Brown, for me, is a legend to these young men. You know? And Brownie is the ultimate case of virtuosity, not for the sake of virtuosity, virtuosity for the sake of expression. And I'm never going to sacrifice melody or groove to express my ego. And so you never hear Clifford Brown stepping outside of the framework of a piece of music to put more light on himself. And for me, that's kind of what separates hard bop from bebop. Bebop very much becomes about a self-indulged moment for me. And Clifford Brown pulls that back in and says, you know what? The song has to have preeminence. The structure of melody and groove needs to drive the music. And I could still be an incredible virtuoso within groove and melody. Watch. And hard bop is birthed in that cauldron. And it's stepping aside from the ego of self. And now it's centered by the power of the movement of a people. Biblical in proportion. This is not just music. This is culturally significant resistance against tyranny. And it's speaking with such a profound, profane voice. They're not being genteel about this. They're not being apologetic about this. Clifford Jordan comes on the scene, and he's another guy that's speaking with a lot of the same veracity, a lot of the same potency. This record's with Lee Morgan, Curtis Fuller, John Jenkins. Ray Bryant drives the piano on this one with Paul Chambers and Art Taylor. Art Taylor's another guy that's on a lot of great hard bop sessions. And the bass players, the drummers, and the pianos set the table. They're laying down the groove. And when the rhythm section's laying down the steel hammer of change, you can't help it as a horn player to want to improvise your most virile, potent stuff. You're like, whoo, listen what they're doing. I can't wait for my turn. Let me say what I got to fucking say right now. That's how potent it is. It's not on the sidelines whispering in footnotes. It's picking up your megaphone and saying, yo, peep this. This is how we really feel. Lou Donaldson. Lou's a little bit older than most of these other cats. Yet, I feel like Lou, who again, he doesn't play with the same click quite the same way, but I feel like he makes a few records here in this era, 57, that he's not doing bebop really anymore, and he's not moved to soul jazz yet. So he's actually firmly in the hard bop tradition here, 56, 57, 58, and then he slowly transitions into stuff at Cadet and later back at Blue Note. That's boogaloo, R&B, soul jazz. And by then he's a pretty older fella, and he's just kind of relaxing. But I feel like in this moment, Donaldson is like, okay, I hear you young guys. Yeah, you're right. This is great. Herman Foster's on the piano on this one, Peck Morrison, Dave Bailey, and Ray Barretto. So it's a completely different band from the Blue Note sound. But I still feel like Donaldson in this moment is in simpatico with the rest of the crew. 1567. The great Curtis Fuller gets his first record as a leader at Blue Note. And he's only there in a small window. He's on the Savoy shortly after this. He made a record or two for Prestige before this. It's his Blue Note time where he's his most potent, his most driven. I've heard a lot of Fuller's material, and what he's doing here is very powerful stuff. This is his first album. This comes with Curtis Fuller, Hank Mobley, again, Bobby Timmons, Paul Chambers, and Art Taylor. So you got yourself an agitated rhythm section there, throwing down some velocity, throwing down some tense tracks for your guys' locomotions to fly on. And Fuller to me is not quite the virtuoso of, I need to clean that record. He's not quite the virtuoso of a Jimmy Cleveland or J.J. Johnson, but he's a very potent, angry young man. 1568, Hank Mobley comes back again, and again, Mobley is showing edges here. You know, by the time he's doing Caddy for Daddy, he's kind of chilled out himself. But here, playing with Curtis Porter, Bill Hardman, Sonny Clark, Paul Chambers and Art Taylor, and there's Sonny Clark. And you'll feel an intensity in this record in 1568 that's something Hank doesn't always express. You know, you listen to playing with Wynton Kelly and Grant Green by 1960-61, it's a different sound than what he's emoting here. 1569, Paul Chambers. This is his third record, his second in this era, Bass on Top. And Chambers is doing some bowing. There's some interesting composition on here. But again, there's a darkness. Even to the composed parts here, there's a finite, just a darkness to that. You know, an exhaustion, a willingness to fight, a willingness to continue, and I trust me when I say this, there is no other time in any jazz label's history that I know of. And as great as European jazz is, it never has the anger in it because it's in a softer environment. It's not in the intensity of New York and the racial conflict of America. Jazz recorded in Europe has a more of a laid-back, emotional state. It doesn't mean it can't play at blistering tempos, but it's expressing a softer condition. Because my experience is a little bit more lemonade, a little bit less lemon. Got me? And so, what Blue Note is doing here, and what so few people have the scope to grasp, because you really need not just the Blue Note body of work, you need all the other labels' bodies of work too, to really be able to recognize the potency and virility of this music. And once you see release after release after release of legendary music, it starts to become clearer and clearer just why this music's had the staying power and the popularity sustainment that it's had. It's more popular now and been reissued in bigger volumes in the last 30 years than it was at the time it was made. That's important to grasp. These records were made in small pressings in their first run. Some never made a second pressing, some made a second, third, and then a lot of it does get reissued once Liberty, once United Artists buys it, and that none of that really counts as the initial sales at the time. And they're made in small runs for small, limited demographics who want this type of music. And Curtis Fuller's on this, you can hear him right there. Art Farmer is being propelled to some real tension driving here. Mobley, Wilbur Ware, Louis Hayes, the young Louis Hayes here, 1957. He hasn't even made his first record as a leader yet, Louis Hayes. He's a great drummer, and definitely the youth is being served at Blue Note. And while they were grown men, most of the other greats of this time frame are a generation older. You know, a lot of them are dead. Parker's dead, Clifford Brown's dead, Lester Young is dead. There's a new generation of kids coming up in the shadows of Parker. And even Miles to me is cut from a little bit of an older cloth than the young fire of a lot of these kids. Again, this is Dial S for Sonny, number 1570. And there's a potency. Listen to, man. You don't hear Farmer in this context very often. Put this into a film soundtrack. Okay, what is the setting? What's happening? It's got a blister tempo. It's got an aggressive tact to it. It's not genteel. It's tense. It's tactile. It's tense. It's frustration, anger. There's a difficult conversation happening here. You're not putting this in a romantic scene. You're putting this in a ruthless foot chase that ends with a slow motion fisticuff. See what I'm saying? The color of a song, how it would fit in the film, tells you a lot about what the players are telling you. So much of this music, Blue Note from this era, is filled with tension, filled with adrenaline, filled with shades of violence. You know what I'm saying? And once you recognize that dynamic of instrumental music, how would they use this in a film? What would the scene be? And it's not sitting riverside on the Seine in a bistro drinking your cappuccino. Can you bring me another crumpet, darling? Can I get a baguette? It's not that. You can't just sit and relax to this music. This music is potent. It's fast. It's got an anger. And once you can cash in on that, you'll start to hear jazz for what it is and what it's telling you. I'm going to skip this record, 1571. This is Bud Powell's comeback to Blue Note. He records for Blue Note in the early 50s and makes some great recordings. He has a lot of trouble with the law, trouble with mental breakdowns. Spends a lot of time in asylums, shock therapy. He comes back and he actually makes some brilliant late life recordings before he goes to Europe and eventually passes. But Powell is an older school cat. Alfred Lion jumped at the chance to record him again, even after some of his breakdowns. And this is actually brilliant stuff. But again, this is a record, and it's got Chambers, Fuller, and Art Taylor on it. So it's a great modern piece. But Powell's an older guy, comes from a different mindset. Fuller, Bone and Barry. And of course, Barry means baritone. And Tate Houston plays the baritone, a guy I don't know much about. But who's on the piano? Sonny Clark. Who's on the bass? Paul Chambers. Art Taylor's on the drums. And so, again, you have that potency of a very militant Sonny Clark informing all of these records. And I feel like even sessions he wasn't on, he was influencing. He was influencing. And I think Clark's he spent time on the West Coast, originally from Pittsburgh, if I recall, Sonny Clark. I did an whole episode biography on him probably 2-3 months ago, which is worth watching. It's an interesting life story, but you get the feeling from Sonny Clark that I need to make change myself. I need to be that change. And I am willing to put my life at risk to speak loud for my people. And I think his influence is simply indelible.